What's up everybody, my name is Brendan and this is BigBearB Creative. Welcome back everybody to another Friday how-to photography video, specifically always about landscape, nature, and wildlife, because that's just what I love to do. So if you guys like that stuff, I'm glad you're here. You should subscribe, because this is what we do every single week, and we also sprinkle in a little bit of graphic design too, but that's also has to do a lot with nature too. So yeah, but today, as you probably saw in the thumbnail, we're gonna be talking about 5 great tips that you could use to make your photos look perfectly sharp, focused, and just right. To make them look how they're supposed to look so you could actually sell them or just look like a real true professional as you are. So basically we're gonna break it down. We're gonna have 2 techniques that you could use, 2 settings you need to use, and just 1 piece of equipment that you're gonna have to use. You have to use. There's no way around it. You have to. But don't worry, it's not gonna break your bank, as photography can be a very expensive hobby or business, whatever it is that you want to refer to it as for yourself. But let's get into those first 2 techniques for how to get sharp photos. So basically the first one that you're going to want to use is to know where you need to focus. Now for this you're going to use the layering technique, which is basically going to be your foreground, midground, and background. And you're going to focus on that very far point in your midground, basically right before your background starts. So to help explain this, I'm going to bring in a photo that I shot at Yosemite to just kind of break down these kind of layers and where you need to focus. So as we see with this photo, we have the trees in the very front. That's going to be your foreground. We don't need to focus there because there's so much more we need to see, like Half Dome back there. So as you can see on the side, that there's a little bit of a mountain edge, I guess, creeping into the photo. Now that's not the point that we want to focus on. Obviously the point we want to focus on is where I've highlighted in maroon and put focus area. So that's going to be Half Dome itself. We're going to focus on the very far ridge, the very far tip of that mountain ridge, basically right where the sky, which is the background, is meeting the image. Now to get your focus, you're going to want to zoom in as much as you can. So if you're using a telephoto lens, go ahead and zoom in all the way. If you're not using a telephoto lens, and if you are, this next part you're still going to do. You're going to use the zoom button on your camera in your live view to actually zoom in as far in as you can, and then set your focus manually. Just keep moving it around until it looks as perfectly sharp as it can get. Then, if you are using a telephoto lens, go back to whatever you're actually wanting to compose your shot with. It doesn't have to be zoomed all the way in. Now if you're using a prime lens, then you just have to go back to where it's back to normal and not zoomed in on your live view. And then you can start taking your shot. Now the second technique that you need to use, we touched on a couple weeks ago in a video that I showed you kind of how to fix this if you didn't follow it, and that's going to be the shutter speed rule. Now with the shutter speed rule, basically that means that you're going to, at minimal, you're going to use the reciprocal or whatever you're shooting at. So if you have a prime 35 lens on, you're going to make sure that you're shooting at least at 1/35 for your shutter speed. However, if you're not using a full frame camera, and most beginners aren't, if you are a beginner, you're most likely just using a normal DSLR. And with DSLRs, they're gonna have a crop sensor. Now, I know I shoot on a Nikon, and I think Sony has the same crop. I think Canon is a little bit different, just because Canon has to be Canon and they have to be different. But for me, specifically, my crop sensor is a 1.5 magnification. So you're gonna take whatever you're shooting at, and you're going to times it by whatever your crop factor is. So let's say you're shooting at a 50mm, just to make this math easy for me. You're going to times it by that 1.5. So you're going to end up shooting basically at a 75mm. So you're going to want to make sure that your shutter speed is 1/75. And you'll just do that with whatever crop sensor your camera has specifically. You could always look it up and you'll find it on the internet somewhere. There's a bunch of different websites to break them all down. But typically if you're shooting on a Nikon or Sony, it's going to be about a 1.5 magnification. And then I believe Canon is 1.6 or 1.7. Fuji, I don't know what that one is, but I'm going to find out because I have an eye on a Fuji camera that I definitely want to get at some point. So let's move on to the best settings for getting a perfectly sharp photo. So the first one is you're going to want to shoot with a 2-second timer. Now all cameras have time shutters basically, where you can click it, let the camera do what it needs to do, and it's going to take the photo for you. Typically they're going to have a 2 or a 10-second timer. 10 is overkill, you don't need to use it. You're going to want to shoot with that 2-second timer. So basically what's going to happen when you have that set, you're going to click the shutter speed and you're going to step away and the camera's going to stabilize. by the time it takes the photo at least. And then in doing that, it's going to make sure that when the photo is taken or during the actual exposure of the photograph, the camera isn't shaking or moving, causing any sort of motion blur or anything like that in the camera, or in the shot. It would still technically be in the camera too. But yeah, basically, that's why you want to use that 2-second timer, just to stop that. Now, if you're using the shutter speed rule, this should minimize this whole effect of the motion blur of the camera moving itself, but still, you're going to want to do everything you can to make sure you're getting that perfectly sharp photo. So you're going to need to shoot at the 2-second. Now, the next one that you're going to need to do is to shoot at the lowest ISO possible for your camera. All cameras, they have a base ISO, which is the lowest ISO you can go, which is going to mean that that's not bringing in any artificial light, basically. So for my camera, it has a base ISO of 100. For my phone, I have a base ISO of 50. Now, some other kind of cameras, they have different levels, but typically you're going to find either a 100 or a 50. Sometimes they have like a low one, which I believe is lower than 50, but those are more in the newer cameras. If you're a beginner, you're most likely not going to have a newer one. So you're going to want to shoot with whatever lower ISO you have as your base. Now, you're going to do this because the more you crank up your ISO, that's going to be bringing in a lot of artificial lighting, which is going to bring out a lot of noise and grain in your photo, which is going to make it, one, not look sharp, and it could even start to affect kind of the focus of it. Just makes it look like a very poor image. Now, if you're putting in all this work, going to these locations to take these photos, you don't want to get back home, look at it on your computer, and it's just too bad. It's too grainy. You could do a little bit of noise, denoise functions and editors, but it's not going to clear it all up. So you want to make sure that you're shooting as low as you can. Now, if all your other settings are set where they have to be for the kind of look that you're going for, you can crank up the ISO a little bit, but just do so minimally to where you get it just bright enough that when you take it over into your editor, you can bring up the shadows a little bit and it's going to look perfect. Because you could bring back a lot more of shadows and you can highlights. So if you're underexposed a little bit, that's better. You'd rather have it be there than to just have too much noise in your photograph. Now, when you do bring up the shadows, it can bring in a little bit of noise, but it's not going to be as much as the ISO. Just stick to base ISO, trust me. So those are the two settings you're definitely going to need to use for a perfectly sharp photo. You're going to want to use that 2-second timer, and you're going to want to make sure your ISO is as low as you can. Now, it's photography. You always need to have equipment. We always got to talk about gear and all that kind of stuff. Don't worry, I'm not going to break your bank on this one, but it is going to be a very worthwhile investment. So the one thing that you need to get perfectly sharp images for your photography, other than your actual camera body and your lens, because, well, if you're looking at this video, you probably already have one, or you're thinking about getting one. But the next thing you're going to need is going to be a tripod. Crazy, right? Yeah, you need a tripod. It's not something you can go without. You need one, specifically if you're wanting that perfectly sharp photo. Now, if you're using the shutter speed rule that we talked about earlier, you could get away with some handheld shots, but for the most part, you're just going to want that tripod. It's going to make it's going to make your life easier because, one, you don't have to hold the camera, keep moving around, make sure it's steady while you're taking the shot. You're just going to set it there. And one, it's just going to take a little bit of weight off you, because if you're doing landscape photography, you've probably been walking for a long time already. So just make sure you get that tripod, set it on there, make sure everything is tight down. That means the legs that are extending, tighten them down as much as you can. Speaking of legs, go from the top down in terms of the extensions. So basically work with the thicker ones first. Only use the bottom parts of your tripod legs if you have to. They're just typically very thin, and they can be easily blown by the wind unless you have something that's weighing your tripod down. So just work from the top down from there. Also avoid using that center column that comes in a lot of tripods, because basically that's going to be the same, like those lower legs, and be flimsy, they're going to wave around a lot, and that's something you do not want. I feel like my background has gotten a little bit darker since shooting this. Let me know if it has. I'm not quite sure. I'll see it in post, but just go ahead and let me know anyway, down in the comment section. But yeah, you're gonna wanna you're gonna wanna keep from raising, again, that center column, unless it's just something you have to use. Or you can just make sure that whatever tripod you do get, that you're making sure that it is at least tall enough for you. That's a problem I have with mine. I'm about 6'2", 6'3". A lot of tripods struggle to get that tall, so basically I have to use that bottom leg and I have to use that center column. It's something I wish I didn't have to use, but sometimes I have to for the shots I'm getting. So those are the 5 tips that you need to make sure you're getting perfectly sharp photos. You're going to want to make sure you're focusing at the right point, that furthest mid-ground section of your photo. Make sure you're focusing there. Also, you're going to want to make sure you're using that shutter speed rule if you aren't shooting along exposure or water or sky or anything like that. And then next, you're going to want to make sure that you're shooting with a 2-second timer, as well as shooting with a very low ISO, particularly towards the base, if not the base. And then the last thing, you're going to want to make sure that you're shooting on a tripod. Now, since you made it all the way down here, like I said earlier, I have a little extra thing for those wildlife photographers. Instead of shooting with that 2-second timer on your camera, just use a shutter release remote. You can find some for like $10 on Amazon. They're a huge help for a lot of photographers. You just plug it in, sit there, wait for it for, in this case, an animal, a beautiful animal to come across your screen. Take the photo with just that remote. It's gonna mean you don't have to wait or time it perfectly. You could even do shutter burst with them, so that way you're making sure you're getting all the shots. But that's a little pro tip for you. Use that shutter release remote. It's gonna help out a lot, and they're very cheap. Now, if you guys are wondering what other kind of equipment, because like I said, photographers need gear and all that kind of stuff, make sure you check in the description box below. They're gonna have, at the very bottom, it's gonna be the list of all the stuff that I use and things you could use to just help with your photography as well. And also, while you're down there, check out some of the other links. There's some good things there too. So let me know what you guys learned in this video. If you did learn anything, or if you want anything else more explained, you can let me know down in the comment section below. You could also let me know on my social medias. I'll display them here, and they're also going to be down in the description box as always. Basically, you can let me know there if there's anything more you want to talk about with this kind of stuff, or tips I could give you, or if you have any questions about your own photography, you can tag me in them or send them to me, and I would love to discuss them with you guys. So just let me know if you guys want to do that, or just send them over there, and I would love to chat with you guys about that. Also, make sure you're smashing the like on this video. Not smashing like, well, you can smash the like, bear paw like. I like bears. As you can tell, I'm wearing bear and bear. I'm wearing all my Big Bear Lake, California. That's where I'm from. That's where I originally am from. But I'm wearing all that gear today. Also, mainly I'm just wearing the hat because my hair is a little too crazy. But let me know if you like this video, like I said, by hitting that like button. Also, make sure you're subscribing because we do these how-to videos every Friday and photo editing videos every Sunday. Every now and then I might throw a little something else for you guys. And if you're wanting more tips specifically about how to get some very sharp photos, go ahead and check out my blog post I posted yesterday. Again, I'll link that down in the description box as well. Thank you guys for watching this video. Hope you guys have a great day. Be safe during this time and go be creative.